You're listening to the 37th broadcast of TBR Radio's, the TBR History Hour. With your host, TBR contributing editor, Dr. Edward DeVries. On today's show, Dr. Ed talks with TBR executive editor, Paul Angel, about the September-October issue of the Barnes Review magazine. This current issue of the Barnes Review is a double-length issue, defending American heroes. As angry mobs tear down the monuments to our nation's heroes, the Barnes Review is reminding us how these men became our heroes, and defending their good names.
This was the Defending American Heroes issue of the Barnes Review, the September-October 2020 issue. And the inspiration really came from the fact that ever since George Floyd was killed, that, pretty much cities have been burning, monuments have been coming down. Western civilization is being attacked from every angle now. And these monuments that are coming down, there are reasons why monuments were erected to these people to begin with. It wasn't like they just picked some random person on the street and said, hey, this guy's wearing a nice looking frock coat. Let's build a monument to him. I mean, these were people who founded the nation. These were people who founded our institutions. These were people who had great accomplishments. These were people who advanced our society and our civilization. They were heroes. And we memorialize them because they were heroes. And now, essentially, we have a generation of people, or at least a few people within a generation of people, who are doing everything in their power to attack those heroes and to, basically destroy everything that those people had built. And so this issue was Defending American Heroes. And I guess the first question, Paul, is as an editor, I mean, you obviously had to be mad about something or upset about something or inspired about something. In other words, what is it that made you decide that this needed to be the issue, that we defended our American heroes?
Well, as you look back over the past decades, you see a slow and steady diminution of our culture and a culture of heroes. You see basically the structure that was created really by our people and for our people, and it seems to work for many other people as well here in the United States. I mean, it's a pretty free and open and fair society. But to see this slow chipping away over the years, and then to see it culminate so quickly in what is basically, I would say, as a Marxist type of rewriting of history. And so really what was the impetus for this was years ago. We knew this was coming. I mean, I wrote an editorial for the Barnes Review when Trump was elected, how they were going to probably want to attack the Washington Monument and tear down anything related to Trump and hunt down polar bears, right, because they were white. And so it was a parody to some degree, but we knew this was coming years ago. And of course now with the acceptance of Black Lives Matter as a advocacy group, I believe, or they try to present themselves as such, I'm not sure they are, for black grievances, then you have this particular group gaining quite a bit of power, financial power, and obviously social power when you have the biggest companies in the world kowtowing to this new group. You throw that in there. One of the accelerants we didn't expect, of course, and any type of predictions we have for the future was the reaction that people have had to the coronavirus. And you throw all this stuff together, and the Floyd killing, and of course the narrative of whites being the greatest enemy of minority in this country is in the inversion of truth, as is almost all of what we're told. Just flip it upside down, and there you'll have the truth. But the white people are the great enemies when we're really their best friends, and this country is really so equitable. And so even the poverty-stricken people, and listen, there are people suffering, and I will say that the majority of them are white, and the number of people in poverty. But all this stuff, so I could go on and on about the facts. I could go on the facts about the inversion of truth, about black-on-black crime and black abortion. I mean, we're estimating that over the past 10 to 15 years, perhaps 40 million blacks have been either aborted. A perfect storm has arisen now, in which all this stuff has been accelerated. You have this And it, by the way, I don't think it's a race war we're going to be going through. I'll get around to my what got me mad in a minute. But just all this stuff come together, the acceleration of the attacks on culture, the ripping down of the monuments, as one commentator said, kind of funny but true, is that America now leads the world in plinths. We're a plinth society. Everywhere you go, there's just a plinth with no statue on it, and perhaps some curse words and some graffiti. But so we knew this was coming. But even as just recently, when the assault on Robert E. Lee in particular, because that was the actual thing that kind of was this impetus, because his statue was also at the core of the Charlottesville rally. Okay, which was a precursor. We try to tell everybody that this was a precursor of what you could expect, that if you spoke up for someone, even with the honorable past of Robert E. Lee, you could be attacked with bags of human feces and urine and metal bars, and you better go for a peaceful protest. You better bring a shield and a helmet, and that Antifa was dangerous, and that Black Lives Matter is just an extension of the radical black theology and social movements of the 1960s and 70s with the Black Panthers. Anyway, I was reading this book, I was watching this stuff in Charlottesville, and they're trying to get rid of the statue right here in Richmond, which is pretty close to me. We've already removed multiple statues on Monument Row. You got some rioting and some looting there. Anybody with funny-looking clothes, white people in funny-looking clothes, get pulled off statues. I guess white people in funny-looking clothes that were walking the streets probably got beat up. This was it accelerated. But this book I had read as a child, and I looked at all these people, and they're heroes, and they're taking their statues down. And it was very painful for a lot of people. But it reminded me of the book I read as a kid with Robert E. Lee in it. It was called Great American Heroes. So they had Thomas Jefferson and Washington, of course, and Jackson, and all kinds of people in there. They had Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. And I thought, well, how many of these people are going to be in a publication of the future with an honest history? And by honest, I mean without any political correctness in there. There are some aspects of the past of the great American heroes that we have, as revisionists would all agree, that always need reexamination, because that's what revisionists do. They look at history and they try to bring it into accord with the facts that we have now, because obviously we have more facts now because we have more evidence now. We have more scientific exploration of archaeological sites and this type of stuff. But that being said, when you look back on there, as I read the one about Robert E. Lee, I'm like, God, this guy was just a great guy. I mean, yeah, sure. You can judge him now if you feel like rewriting history and try to place him into the 21st century. But in his era, and even now, he would have been a towering figure, no doubt. And so would have all these guys. I mean, can you imagine? Look at the politicians we have now, Ed, right? You've got the Squad, which I don't know. Maybe one or two of them are smart, actually, high IQ. But I've seen some of them talk, and I don't really think they are. And then you look at even the Republican side, and there's more Democrats. I could name Democrats that I hate to be so partisan, but I mean, I could name 10 Democrats I don't like, and off the top of my head, they're supporting this or not condemning it. And of course, Republicans aren't doing much about it either. So I figured somebody had to put together, finally, to get around to the circuitous route that I took to this point, is we wanted to put this into a publication where all the biographies of some of the guys that had their statues taken down. We would have had to have a 500-page issue to do everybody, but we got as many of the targets and why, trying to figure out why it is that they targeted, for instance, if you were to list the people, right, Lee and Junipero Serra and Thomas Jefferson, of course, in Washington. I'm trying to think who their third one was. They had three in particular that they really liked: Junipero Serra, Robert E. Lee, and then a third figure, Columbus, of course. It was Columbus, and earned the particular ire of the mob. So I'm looking at the biographies of all these people, and at the end of each one, all I could say was to myself was, "Wow, this was just a great person for one reason or another, and worthy of a holiday or worthy of a statue, not just any statue, but the statues we build and that European society builds are beautiful things with beautiful plinths." That's all that's left. But the bronze work that goes into it, the artistic posing, the understanding of the folds of clothing and all this other stuff, the anatomy of a horse, the proportions of these things. There's things that very few other cultures, the Chinese did, I'm sure, but even they're like made statues of, I was going to say, but and the Chinese have that famous collection of the big soldier, but they're all different. Their faces are different, but they're all just standing there, kind of straightforward. The things we do are so gorgeous. So it was all just a matter of all that put into this Defending American Heroes. So we have biographies of Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson, because they tried to tear down the Jackson statue in D.C. They tore down or defaced Jackson statues elsewhere. Thomas Jefferson, we know, was pulled down off his base, and I believe it was Portland, at his Thomas Jefferson High School. We have a Thomas Jefferson High School somewhere here in Virginia, and it's usually attended by the brightest students. By the way, it's 75% Asian, just as an aside. But that being said, his statue was torn down there, basically by black and white mobs, because we understand this isn't really a race war going on. It's white people killing white people out there, and black people killing black people. And then you throw a few mobs killing in store owners. You never know what they're going to be. They're just small businessmen. And we also were wondering what's behind that. So a couple articles, and very good articles by John Friend, are in there about the Sunrise Movement and the in this particular issue, yes, and describing how these radical lobbying groups get in and make change. People always say to me over the years, George Soros runs the world. And I'd say, well, yeah, I could agree with you. I mean, the guy was a money speculator, so he had the ability to create and destroy entire economies in the course of his money changing. But he's also such a social activist now with a ton of money. You know that. He had originally gave a large grant to Media Matters for America, which is the organization that comes after organizations like ours and tries to get advertisers to stop, et cetera, et cetera. But he found out he could really make his headway into local politics and to really making social changes with his money was to get local prosecutors elected. And that's where you find the Kim Foxes and the Kim Gardners and one of these ones in L.A. and others in New York that want to release rioters immediately, right? Who's behind this thing? Where's the money coming from? This isn't no small-time operation. You just don't come up with a really professional logo and website overnight. And so that was pretty much that angle on that. As these people ended up, by the way, a lot of them in Minneapolis. Keith Ellison's son, Ilhan Omar, of course, Keith Ellison, the older one, who is the Attorney General of the state in which, of course, George Floyd was killed. And so there's a couple good articles on that. And then we also have Frank Rizzo. Charles Lindbergh, Rizzo, they took his statue down. He was the former police chief and mayor of Philly, and very tough on crime. And he was against some of he lived through the era of the rioting and after the King incident, but also he was police commissioner, et cetera, during some more riots in Philly. So his statue was going to get torn down. So we tell his story too, because he was in the book Populism versus Plutocracy. Several of the biographies in this particular issue come from that book. That book was edited by Willis Carto, who was the founder of the Barnes Review, and Michael Collins Piper, who was a very popular writer and reporter. I worked with Carto for many, many years, as people know, at the Spotlight and later on at American Free Press and the Barnes Review together. And so we also have Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh, they want to change his airport name, and one of the activists for the Anti-Defamation League in the West Coast has been constantly pushing to have the name suppressed. Recently, I think they replaced a mural to him, so maybe he's being resuscitated. But of course, poor Charles Lindbergh was considered an anti-Semite and a bad influence on America because of his resistance to World War and American entry into World War II. And there's some other good articles in there about slavery, too, since that's a big issue about reparations and tearing down these white slaveholders. This is a key issue in this. And then there's a great article by black columnist Larry Elder, who is a black community. His message is black community, take responsibility, keep fathers at home message. But he's got a great article in there on the Arab involvement in the slave trade, which TBR readers know is was probably the most well organized, most pervasive and far reaching slave trading and capturing network, right? The North African, the Barbary pirates, and a portion of that at that era in the maybe about 1812, I guess it was 1815. I could be wrong. Was all about putting them out of business. So that's a fascinating article. At the end, it was a big issue.
Web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
No. I see a lot of people would not know who he was unless they lived out west or in California particularly, because he has a lot of statues there. But Father Serra, who basically, by some accounts, basically brought Roman Catholicism and Christianity to the west coast of the United States, to California, and particularly, at least, the Roman Catholic version of the same, the Russian Orthodox missionaries. I believe our friend Dr. Matt Johnson would probably argue that the Russian Orthodox missionaries had been to California and had brought Christianity there long before Father Serra did, but Father Serra had quite an influence on the state of California, and he did a lot for the Indians, but yet they're tearing down his statues and saying that he was, discriminating against the Indians. Great article, because it introduced a lot of people to an American hero, or at least a West Coast hero, that a lot of our readers might have never even known who he was.
Yeah, he was quite a guy, and I read that one too, and I didn't know that much about him for that very reason. Ed, he wasn't mentioned too much in our school books, but I did include. By the way, that was one of the last articles that John Tiffany, biographies that John Tiffany had submitted before he passed away. We may not have mentioned that to anybody, but while we were getting ready to get this issue together, the little editor of TBR, who had been editor for many years, passed away after a long battle with Parkinson's. At any rate, he was able to, although it was difficult, to write one last article on Junipero Serra, and then we combined that with and added as a second article some entries from Father Serra's diary, but also another Catholic priest who knew him and described the day that Serra passed away. But what struck me was how at odds all these stories are with the mainstream narrative now that you see. You don't see much. If I can make the comparison between the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, one was, America is a country in need of dire reformation. It was founded on the roots of original sin of slavery and slaveholding, albeit a false narrative, in my opinion, versus the Republican one, which was like people are good, people can succeed, people love each other, And so reading Serra's diary entry about his first encounters with the Indians, but also, by the way, he also brought clothing, evidently, to the West Coast, because most of the natives he met and he described in the early days were just completely naked. Seeing what he had done, and then looking at at how he approached the Indians themselves, and of course, as we're told, he was a slaveholder or a slaver, and he worked these people really hard, and he was forcing them to do a religion that they didn't really want to accept. And then you see how, sometimes the Indians would rise up, and he referred to them as Gentiles. And then there was the converted, I guess. And when sometimes they would rise up against the Spaniards for one reason or another, and then they might slaughter the padre and his assistant and a couple of Spanish soldiers, at a mission. And they would say, well, what do you want us to do about it? The viceroy, would ask the priests and I guess and the local leaders as well. And they're like, well, let's just, kill them all. So not that bad. But he was like, no, don't do that. This isn't why we came here. And he held quite sway and was able to keep this a very beneficent type of system, in my opinion. But he said, no, please, even if they kill me, just, find the one guy who did it and punish him. But don't kill him and don't kill all the people. Don't do that type. That's not the right approach to this. And this is what we came for. And so he was basically saying that, he was ready to martyr himself for this particular cause. And that just is completely at odds with the idea of profiting from slavery and selling goods. And he's saying the financial side, the secular side of life was really just about trying to bring Christianity and salvation to the Indians. Again, probably not something to be judged by exactly in today's standards, but at the time, he was risking life and limb, and he wasn't interested in profit. So even a very simple man, very simple life. The description of his death by the other padre during that day was quite interesting as well. So yes, he has been a particular focus. Obviously, Christianity in general has been a particular focus with the attempts to burn churches and like St. John, St. James down there by, you tell me which one it is, by the White House. And also the fact that during this coronavirus lockdown, that churches and places of religious worship in general were particular targets of onerous strictures for the coronavirus, so that you couldn't attend, like they couldn't have worn masks, or Christians can't be trusted because I guess they're so fervent, they're going to scream and yell and whatever else they're going to do. The government must have thought they were going to be super spreaders, as they call them, right? But you could have certainly held, and many people have, as you well know, held church services, but still it's just that Christianity, and it all comes back to that whole thing. It's kind of the promotion we wrote for this issue was based on, we also sell this book, by the way, The Naked Communist. And if it's to be believed, everything in it, and it looks like it was a pretty good description. It's been updated. And the book was written in 1958 about the goals of revolutionaries and communists and socialists in general as a lead-in for stricter communist dogma to be instituted. They have, of the 45 goals they had, they've implemented 44. Now, I don't know if this is all true. I just know that many of them are right in front of our eyes. So I don't know the list. I should say I don't know the list of all 45 off the top of my head. I could dig it up. But many of the things are what you're witnessing now. They wanted to get control of the teachers' unions. And now you see the teachers' unions this is communists wanting to get control of the teachers' unions because they, first of all, they teach our children, teach or propagandize or brainwash, however you want to say it. But secondarily, they're powerful enough in some states to make demands like no charter schools, which gives kids the option, to go to a different school. But they also want you to adopt the 1619 type of project, which is the belief that American history began with the first slaves in Jamestown, which I don't even know if they're 100% sure they were slaves. It's a very interesting story, by the way, which a man went over in a letter in the last issue of it's published in the September-October issue, in which he talks about, and the guy knew what he was talking about, the first slaves in Jamestown and how they got there and how they really weren't imported by this group. They were more dumped off by Portuguese or pirates or something like that.
Extra, read all about it. If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, read all about it. Mentioned Portuguese, and of course, Father Sarah having not a financial motivation but a missionary motivation. The next article was Columbus, and Columbus was the same way. His journey to the New World was a missionary endeavor, And even when he ended up with all the Mayan gold, we didn't get all the gold, but the gold he got, he didn't steal that gold from the Mayans and the Aztecs. They gladly gave it to them. And Columbus's motivation, even in taking the gold, was because Ferdinand had told Columbus that he would raise the army and he would give Columbus a crusade to free the Holy Land from the Muslims if Columbus could raise the money for it. And so that Mayan gold wasn't to enrich Columbus or King Ferdinand. It was to finance the next crusade.
But I didn't know Columbus ever was able to wander off with lots of Aztec and Mayan gold.
No, Cortez was the one who wound up with the gold, but it went back to Ferdinand to pay for Columbus's crusade.
Right, if he'd struck it rich there, then he would have been the man. All of this, the amount of wealth that must have come out of Central America, let's get back on the subject, but the amount of wealth that came out of Central and South America was immense. And half of it's probably still sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. What percentage of ships got back? Maybe 75%, I figure. I don't know, or weren't captured. But anyway, back to Columbus. The article about Columbus was by Pat Buchanan, and he wasn't particularly optimistic, nor was he praising him too much. He was just saying that basically he's a product of his time, and that the greatest cultures in the world were able to build massive things because they stood the masters of their areas. Sometimes it was done with slavery, sometimes it was done with finances, sometimes it was done with coercion, sometimes it was conquered. But in the end, every culture in the world can be accused of using force to achieve greatness. And so his point, I believe, was much of what we've accomplished in the Western world and the Asian world and the South American and the Central American world, all the different cultures. Even in Africa, of course, there might have been portrayed as an egalitarian paradise, but the Zulus were running rampant over top of other tribes. The Bantus themselves, as a mass group, overcame and conquered and intermixed with others, et cetera, et cetera. So you really can't say that any particular, and especially the time and the people of Columbus, were any worse than anybody else at the time. But we are not expecting. Here we are. We're coming up on October. We've got. Yeah, that's right. We got about a month and a week, I guess, until the Columbus Day, and we'll see how it's met this year. Because whatever remaining Columbus statues have got to be under guard, right, to protect them from the mob, because the mob's going to want to get fired up on Columbus Day, or maybe not. Who knows? Maybe they don't care. Maybe they don't want to serve 10 years in jail. I don't know. But Columbus wasn't particularly the greatest administrator, but he was a pretty good explorer. That's what I'll say there. And he was a brave guy, and he too was worthy probably of a holiday, especially since the holiday was created to lessen animosity towards Italian Americans. So it was an anti-racist day we created, which is now saying it's a racist guy. So I'm saying you better watch out when you start naming your schools after people, the new people that they choose, because you might find out they were pedophiles or mass murderers, right? And you're going to have to change their name again. I imagine one day, to make it safe, we'll have to name everything after ideas like Courage High School or Liberty. That wouldn't even be that, because it wouldn't be good. How about Systemic White Eye?
Well, I went to PS 154 and a half. Now, where the half came from, I don't know. But
maybe we'll have to do that in the future. So things are changing. On another note, and of course, our next issue by the way, everybody should get a Defending America's Heroes issue, either in PDF format, which I believe they sell, or a print copy, because we did get extras. It's $15, and I think it may be a couple of bucks, $4 to send it. Maybe it's $19 total for 144 pages. That's like a 288-page book, and it's just something really people should buy 4 or 5 copies of, so they can give one to their grandchildren and one to their pastor. It's funny we mentioned the religion, because you remember that editorial I wrote a couple of issues ago, I think it was, and it was about the Church of White Guilt. And I just saw, Ed, that they're doing this in church. They're saying, and ours was about what you can expect in a church service in the Church of White Guilt in the future. But now they're already incorporating lines almost like, the Nicene Creed in there, which says, "And I reject my white privilege," and then they congregation is told to answer yes. And sometimes you could tell there wasn't much enthusiasm with saying yes, but the pastor would say yes, and they would say yes, okay. And the other one's rejecting my systemic, I think it was systemic racism, white privilege were the two things that they answered yes to. And that was kind of what we put in that editorial, that this was coming. So they're preaching this stuff through the school system as well.
Talk about the school system. Several school districts across America have made parents sign documents basically saying that they will not listen to or monitor or watch any of the instruction that their children are receiving online.
I find that absolutely unbelievable. There's some crazy things. This country is fractured apart as far as what we believe, and it's shown by the red state, blue state for the most part. And like Washington, Oregon, California, and then New York and its environs, we'll say, depending on how far up you go. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, all the way down here to Virginia, Maryland traditionally. Pennsylvania, not so much. But how different we are as far as how we see things. I've seen some crazy election scenarios being bandied about where the Democrats are going to want to count, and it's going to take forever because everybody better understand that we probably aren't going to have an election, a president decided on election night. Now, it could be if one side or the other has this massive drought. But looking at the mail-in ballots and how long it'll take to get them counted properly and arrived in the hand. They have to be postmarked in some states by the date of the election, which means that if they're postmarked that date, they arrive. They can arrive after a couple days after, I guess. I don't know how that would be. I guess the final counting center, and it could take days to count them after that. And you're looking at the delays in the post office in general. You might not have a president for 8-9 days. So depending on who wins that particular election, also will probably determine where we go with and how far we let the communists go. By the way, I got off the track on that one. I was listing some of the ones that the communists had taken over, and one was the police, the school, teachers unions, but also like demilitarizing and defunding, and I'm demilitarizing is probably not a bad thing, but defunding police departments was something, getting a hold of a political party was something, was one of their objectives. Convincing college kids that violent protest was an acceptable form of to reach solutions to social and other problems, and the list went on, and they were all coming true. Attack the Constitution as a document that had been written by old aristocratic white men who were out of touch with the needs and also slaveholder needs of the citizenry, but also it's not necessarily true, and also the owners of slaves, but also attacked the history of the founding fathers as selfish and single-minded bigots. And the list was amazing. Most of this being done in the news media and the public school system and the institutes of higher learning, where people send their children willingly and pick which one they're going to go to. But yeah, it was scary. So how far, whoever wins this election, I was going to say, and how far this is accelerated, because so many people say, oh, this stuff's going to disappear right after the election. They're not going to talk about systemic racism anymore. And I'm like, well, Black Lives Matter got pretty powerful pretty fast. They got a lot of money. Why would they want to go anywhere when they could actually maybe do something? Now, if they ever start counting the money back and doing the money trail, I don't know where it comes from. And that is something somebody's going to have to do someday, where the money comes for these Marxist revolutionary groups. And Antifa can say they're anarchists, but anarchists don't really want anarchy, because most of these people would have to survive. You can't survive without anarchy unless they're going to create. They tried that in the chops, right? Within 4 days, they were all killing each other and they were starving to death. Couldn't take showers. But yeah, so the election will be very interesting. And then other people, of course, say that that's the end of the world. One way or another, we'll figure out a way to survive, as we always have. It's just that things are going to be tough, especially with the freedom of speech angle. If they're going to be the arbiters, the Kamala Harrises of the world are going to be the arbiters of what we can and cannot say, and make it even worse than it is now. because even now Google's got some guy, some general or something from some intelligence agency over in Israel has come over working for him to ferret out anti-Semitism and racism and all this other stuff, which is basically just part of the conversation. You want to talk about anti-Semitism, we can talk about it, but why wouldn't you let me talk about it? So that's may or may not be worse. Our next issue will be November, December. I doubt we're going to have a president decided by the time we have to drop that thing in the mail. So we'll be flying blind at that point in time.
Well, you talk about craziness. I was reading the Microsoft news feeds this morning, and the Democrats have even proposed that they have mail-in debates now instead of real debates.
Yeah, I'm sure. And Joe Biden's going to be completing his own questions, I'll bet, too. Maybe Trump ought not to write his answers either. I mean, really. It could be, I doubt there will be debate, and this is why you mentioned that. It's because things are, 2020 will be the year you remember. Probably go be 2020, 2021 will be the 2 years in a row. We think it's only going to be 2020, but 2021 ain't looking so calm either. They're changing the way they're doing everything because they want to do everything by mail these days. I don't know if it's to steal things or they think that. And here's the problem. Not a great percentage of the American public votes anyway. Do you know what it is? 40, 50, 60% max. 60% seems high. And so then you have a candidate like Biden. And by the way, people are excited about Trump or they're excited about the Republicans because they see them as the only force big enough in this country to counter what we see as the most organized force that are uniting, which would be Antifa and Black Lives Matter, Democrat Party. And so they want to just vote for the Republicans, seeing them as a bulwark against the changes that we see happening now that happen so quickly. But you never know who's going to be better at stopping it either. The Democrats have pretty much insinuated that they could stop all this unrest in the streets overnight. But anyway, the point being that nobody is exciting. It's exciting the Democrat side, and Democrats traditionally have a lower percentage of the voting populace, I believe, show up to vote. And so if you can't get people excited to get off their butt and go wait maybe 2-3 hours in line, if you can't motivate people to do that, the only way you can say is that's way too much effort for them. So mail them a vote, let them check the box, put it back in the envelope and send it. But they better fill it out right, because I saw something. I saw an amazing number were rejected in New York. Was it 75,000 or 25% of votes, mail-in votes, were rejected? This is not and filling me with confidence as far as their ability to handle it. I think the one part of the process that can be handled properly is the post office, as long as you have some type of oversight over top of employees. I don't really know how they could do it, but it is a federal offense. Not a lot of them want to do it, though we do have evidence that mail-in voting has been a disaster for both sides at different times in different places. But yeah, they want to mail in everything. I don't know how Biden could debate in his state. He might be able to read that little teleprompter, but he's doesn't do too well on his feet about anything. You could ask him what he had for dinner last night. You could ask him, does he have a strategy for buying groceries when he goes to the grocery store? And I don't think he'd be able to do it. Things that he's done forever, People say, Joe Biden, yeah, if he gets through a debate, that's good. Great, he won't make a fool of himself. And maybe and Trump can, maybe if he can get through it, not be really nasty and turn more voters off to just his personality. But why is it that we think that if Joe Biden can get through a debate without making a fool of himself, that's telling us something? Because it is telling us something. It's telling us that a guy's been in business doing the same thing for the past 48, 49, 50 years. Can't do what he's done for those years, like he debates people, he tries to get elected, and he convinces you of his point of view, right? I mean, he's a communicator. Been doing this for almost 50 years. And he can't do it now for an hour and a half. That this is the expectation, then what are you telling us about this guy? So I don't have trust that they'll be able to stop anything if they want to. I think that the Democrats could have stopped the Democrat leadership and say Portland could have stepped in and stopped this. It's just such a weird time. It's such a weird thing, and everything's so politicized. The new problems are really going to get solved because you need both sides to come to agreement But no side wants to give the other side a victory. Very strange. But and that's part of the problem with what's going on now. And I don't think that's going to be getting any better as far as the two sides here. And there ought to be more sides so that there's more political parties and vibrant political parties, not just one that's going to get crushed every so often. We need real live political parties to break the stranglehold these two parties have on politics. But anyway, none of that is discussed in that particular issue.
Right. Well, since we're off topic, I'm going to throw it out there. We may or may not put it in the show, but one of the things that's always amazed me is, and I've always been an advocate for, you vote at a polling place. There are no mail-in ballots. There are no absentee ballots. It's either you show up and you get to vote or you don't. And there are so many people that argue that that's not possible. But yet in Brazil, which is the 7th largest democracy in the world, it's a big developed nation. It's not some little, backwater place. Voting is compulsory. If you do not cast a ballot in a national election, you have like 2 weeks to establish that you were dead, in the hospital, in prison, in jail. And if you can't do that, then you pay a significant fine of several $1,000s. And so 96 to 98% of Brazilians vote in every national election. They go to a polling place to do so. And the election occurs efficiently. It occurs quickly. And the results are accurately counted. So if Brazil can do it, why can't the United States?
Welcome to the Christendom curriculum. Every parent who decides to homeschool wants to secure a great education for their child, while also saving time and money. But these days, many parents have another concern. They also want a homeschool curriculum without all the multiculturalist, politically correct diversity doctrine that's really little more than a thin disguise for an anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-Western civilization bias. Now there is such a curriculum. The Christendom curriculum gives your children a complete education in Bible, history, literature, and more, focusing on the classic academic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we also tell the story of Christendom, the story of the Christian nations, especially as Christ's kingdom has been historically manifest in the nations of Europe and America, and we do so without apology. The Christendom curriculum is the only Christian nationalist homeschool program you'll find. We support the right of the European and American peoples to their historic Christian cultures against the globalist leftists who want to destroy those cultures. Not only that, but we provide assigned reading courses for various hot-button subjects in our current culture wars, including feminism, social justice, and cultural Marxism, among others. These reading courses will teach your kids how to survive a social justice warrior attack, how to debate with leftists on social media, how to reform their local churches and communities, and more. We're living in a time of tremendous historical and social change. Christians have the opportunity now to begin building the culture and civilization of the next 1,000 years and beyond. It's an exciting time to be alive. So if you want to help raise the next generation of culture warriors, if you want your children to grow up with a love for Christ's kingdom and for their own nation, while at the same time learning how to defend America and rebuild the West, the easy-to-use Christendom curriculum is for you. Click the Learn More button to get in on the action. And thanks for listening.
Well, what really scares me, and it kind of leads into the next article, is when an election is as convoluted as the one we're about to have is, and there's no clear electoral majority. In other words, there's no clear determination of the outcome. The House of Representatives is supposed to choose the next president of the United States. And in the case of our next article, Thomas Jefferson, man of the people, he being the first such president chosen by the House of Representatives, I think they made a good choice. But can you imagine Nancy Pelosi's House of Representatives picking the president?
Well, it's kind of what I said, and I probably didn't make the point, which is the caliber of people we've had in politics is pretty low right now. And we went back and looked at this issue, and we saw these people that they're pulling their statues down. We're like, you wish you had people like this in government now. The intelligence of a Thomas Jefferson, the sympathy that Andrew Jackson had for the middle class and the working man. A person like Frank Rizzo was willing to put his life on the line with his men when he was the commissioner of Philly and go out there and try to restore law and order in person. The benevolence of a Juniper Serra, or the intrepid, exploration gene of Columbus. I mean, without these things, without these men, without Robert E. Lee, Jeb Stuart's in here too. We were coming up on. What would America be? Take away, as Pat Buchanan says, take away the old white men, and what do you have left of American history? Not too much. So, like it or not, but as I say, these stories, these biographies, they won't be in the textbooks of the future. What will be in the future is obviously Robert E. Lee and Jeb Stuart aren't going to be in the Book of American Heroes because they were Southerners, and possibly even Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. And we see where they're going with it. It's basically the idea. And look at this. I guess this is exemplified by the push to change Maryland, My Maryland. Maryland, My Maryland is the state song of my home state of Maryland. And in it, we talk about the despot's heel being on thy shore, and the despot being Abraham Lincoln. They talk about not forgetting the flecks of gore that stained the streets of Baltimore, which was probably, if I'm not mistaken, about the draft riots that the people said they didn't want to fight for the Union Army in Maryland. And of course, the one don't take this personally, any Northerners, but there's one line in the Maryland State song that is reject the Northern scum, I think it is. As Virginia calls for us to join in the Civil War and the war between the states and secede with her. And then and then we mentioned Calvert and Howard, Howard County, Howard, the old colonial, and Lord Baltimore, of course. But the new ones like Baltimore, or Maryland, My Maryland. And it's not bad. It's kind of the girl did a good job singing it. But they mentioned Edgar Allan Poe, and they mentioned Rachel Carson. Right? I guess those I didn't know. Even as a Marylander, I didn't know Rachel Carson was a Marylander, and her Silent Spring. Of course, Poe was a great poet and short story writer, but he was also an opioid addict. So that's who they give the white people. But they get like Elijah Cummings, Billie Holiday, Elijah Cummings. That's correct. I did say that. And Harriet Tubman, of course, and Thurgood Marshall, and I forget somebody else. And I'm like, wow, that's the 1619 Project song. There was no more Lord Baltimore or anybody from Maryland who fought in the Civil War. No Southern hero there. No revolutionary people. And they mentioned the Old Line State one time, or about the Old Line, just because the Old Line was our state nickname, because the Old Line State was the old infantry of the line, because Maryland had one of the few regiments or troops or whatever that didn't retreat in every battle for the first 10 battles in the Revolutionary War, because our militia was just not used to this. They mentioned that, but there was none of and just in passing, and I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty much what the history books of the future are going to be like, is the new Maryland, My Maryland, which hasn't been adopted yet, but don't expect that we're going to be able to keep a state song that says Abraham Lincoln is a despot, and we're rejecting the Northern scum. Okay, maybe it isn't the best state song, but we love it anyway.
I don't know. Do they need to add a verse for Governor Hogan's mail-order bride?
Yeah, well, oh my goodness. Or listen, we should probably be rejecting the Southern scum. If I look at poor Governor of Virginia now, there's Northam. Okay, so guess what? There's scum all over the place these days. It isn't reserved for just the North, unfortunately. But that'll be the textbook of the future. And so once again, it brings us back around full circle.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
Well, Andrew Jackson, Bane of the Bankers, was written by Willis Carto, and it's been quite a while since we've had something in the magazine pulled out of the Willis archive.
Oh yes, so Jackson was a hero of Cardo's. As a matter of fact, he's a hero of Trump's as well. And so it was many of the things that embodied populism, and in Jackson, his dislike of a centralized banking system. He was able to motivate men of a multicultural army for the defense of New Orleans. So obviously, people with common goal can work together. And one of the few places here is in the United States. We'll see how that goes if the forces of evil take over. but Jackson was also, like, I remember, just a common guy, right? He was a bit coarse. And if he had a Twitter account, Andrew Jackson would have been tweeting all kinds of stuff that I'm sure his enemies wouldn't have liked. So I thought just a nice story. And there's nothing new particularly about Jackson. This is just an honest, all these are honest populist bios of these guys. So there's so much more that could be said in a 3,000 word article in Jackson when 555 page books have been written about this guy. So we're trying to boil this down as to why these guys are great populist American heroes and why they were great for the common man. Some presidents are great for rich people. Some presidents might be worse or best for civil rights legislation or whatever it may be. Some good for stirring up the racial pot and racial arsonists like Barack Obama. Okay, that was his great skill. But anyway, Jackson, so we included that, and that's from the book Populism versus Plutocracy, as are some of these other ones, including the Thomas Jefferson bio, the Frank Rizzo bio.
So your article on Robert E. Lee, Leader in Reconciliation, you had said that it was inspired by a book that you had read when you were a young man. So was your memory that vivid, or did you go back and reread the book again, or?
No, I mentioned in there that I read that book to my children, so I've kept that book always. That book is just a great book. It's got all the great American heroes in there, and that's kind of what inspired this issue, although our stories are quite a bit longer than the original book. But it's just books like that make you proud to be an American, and that's what they ought to be teaching in school. Because what we have in common with all these races we have here, and creeds and religious beliefs and so different levels of liberality and conservatism, one thing that combines us all together is being Americans. And we have to. It's all the glue we have, and thus we can't be told to be ashamed of our past, because once that bond is gone, the only bond is the grievance bond, the oppression bond. And I don't particularly think that's too positive, nor do I think it's very fair. So I'd rather have us rallying around American heroes. Throw in some Black American heroes, as we do now. Okay, there are some, and some good ones. And there's probably Hispanic ones. There's American Indian heroes that we've had that fought in the Civil War. For instance, Stan Waddy. And we had help from India. You know what I'm saying? So there's a place for real history without destroying or rewriting what we have. What we have is the truth. And we've added to our pantheon over the years and made it more inclusive, shall we say. That book also, and by the way, no, I didn't memorize it. I had the book in front of me. We also, by the way, that was on Robert E. Lee. What a guy. I mean, he did so much stuff. That particular article did focus on his desire to end the Civil War quickly without too much animosity and get on with life as Americans. He immediately began calling both Northern and Southerners Americans, because he wanted those wounds to heal quickly and not be eras of denunciation and vitriol. But anyway, the article that came up after that I thought was better in many ways. It was an interview done with Lee right after the end of the war, and he had lots to say about, as much as he could say, about how he wanted that war to end. And the people in the North and the South all adored this guy. There were articles praising him in Northern newspapers. What a guy Robert E. Lee was. That they were hoping that maybe one day he'd take a position in the Northern Army and be in uniform again to lead troops somewhere or do something. And so that's how they saw him. And it's only very recently that Robert E. Lee has become a target of really falsely inspired outrage. So, but anyway, that great interview, great article from this book.
Well, have you ever seen pictures of Lee? And I know you have a few in the article here in the magazine, but have you ever seen a picture of Lee that was taken right before or right as the war began? And Lee has a full head of black hair, a very, young looking, very, energetic looking man. And then you see pictures that were taken of him toward the end of the war, which are the pictures that we normally see of him, and he's aged 20 years.
Yeah, worse than the president.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen, I mean, at that age, you think about war and why many of the things about it are so absolutely horrendous. Staying awake days at a time, hygiene, disease, physical exertion, riding a horse, a man of that age, how that must have hurt his back, and the number of miles that he rode. The pressure of it, will make your blood pressure go up. And it's the battle, the adrenaline, the whole thing. It is just like packing decade on in that 4 or 5 years of that particular era for him. But anyway, at the end of that article, you say, in the interview, you say, wow, what a guy. Why are they tearing his statue?
Truth be told, we've been asking that question since about 2015 when the removal of flags and monuments really began in this country. And of course, they accelerated even more here a few months ago with the death of George Floyd. But we've been asking that question all along as far as, why are they pulling down the statues of these great men, but especially Lee. It was said of Lee that he had no vice, he only had virtue. He was the only student to ever graduate from West Point who never had a demerit. If you were to look up the word integrity in a dictionary, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a picture of Robert E. Lee. He was someone who, for decades, for 150 years almost, his critics had to criticize him for his virtues because he had no vices and he had no sins. He had no skeletons in his closet for which they could criticize him. And so now they're criticizing him for things that are mere inventions. For example, they criticized Lee for having been a slave owner. Lee inherited slaves and he owned them exactly the amount of time it took him to free them. But again, facts mean nothing to these angry mobs. And so, yeah, we're asking ourselves that mind-blowing question. Why are they tearing down the statues of this great man? And of course, the same could be said for Father Sarah. The same could be said for Thomas Jefferson. The same could be said for Christopher Columbus. The same could be said for everybody who we talked about in this Defending American Issues September-October 2020 issue of the Barnes Review magazine. This is truly a great issue of the magazine, maybe the best issue of the Barnes Review that has ever been published. And I know I've said before about what some great issues we've come out with, and they just seem to keep getting better and better. But this really is just an awesome issue. There's just so much material there. There's just so much to unpack. Paul and I could not possibly unpack it all in one radio broadcast. We didn't even try. And so if you come back next week, same time, same place, same bat time, same bat channel, however you're tuned in this week, come to the same place at the same time. Do it again next week. We'll be here. And Paul and I will continue the conversation. And we'll pick up where we left off in the magazine, which means that the next article will be Jeb Stuart, and then we'll go forward from there. And Jeb Stuart was another great American, but we can wait till next week to talk about him. But same bat time, same bat channel, come back. We definitely want to keep talking about this great issue of the Barnes Review magazine. Go to www.barnesreview.org, www.barnesreview.org,
and you can find out how you can get a copy of this great Defending American Heroes issue of the Barnes Review. If you're not a subscriber to the Barnes Review, you may just want to purchase an individual copy of just this issue, but I strongly suggest you become a subscriber. And when you do, we can send you this magazine. We can send you a copy of the current issue, as well as you do have a subscription. And so every other month, a great copy of the Barnes Review will land in your mailbox, and you'll want that. We're also offering PDF subscriptions along with the print subscriptions, so you'll be able to read it even before it hits your mailbox. It will hit your email inbox, and you'll be able to read it electronically. Anyways, we are out of time, but if you happen to be watching or listening on YouTube, please click like and subscribe. That helps our channel out a lot. And from all of us here at TBR Radio, until next week, God bless.